So good evening, ladies and gentlemen. A very warm welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for joining us today for the 10th Parliamentary session of the World Teen Parliament. Around a year back, we started thinking that let's create an institution where we could bring together some of the most amazing teenagers from across the world onto a single forum, and they could drive change with their vision. So नमस्कार, आप सभी का स्वागत है वर्ल्ड टीन पार्लियामेंट या विश्व किशोर संसद के 10वें संसदीय सत्र में। आज अगले 1 घंटे में हमारे साथ जो हमारे स्पीकर्स हैं, गेस्ट्स हैं, वो हमारे टीनेजर्स के साथ या हमारे टीन एमपीस के साथ इंटरेक्ट करेंगे, उनके सवालों के जवाब देंगे और अपना एक्सपीरियंस उनके साथ शेयर करेंगे. So the next 60 minutes, our guests will be sharing their experiences with our teen MPs, and they'll be putting up some questions, some queries, some reviews, some comments, and trying to initiate a conversation that could go beyond borders, beyond boundaries, and could really establish a more inclusive, a more diversified world for all of us. Thank you so much once again for joining us. We have 2 amazing people with us who will be talking today at the 10th Parliamentary session. Before we start the session, the World Teen Parliament was started with a very simple vision that every year, let's try to identify 100 teenagers who can change the world with their ideas, with their work. And for the last 7-8 months, the current 100 teen MPs have been working on varied issues, doing some amazing work on different issues to improve the world around them. And this year, the search has already begun. So if you're a teenager, a school leader, or a teacher, do submit your entries as soon as possible, because we close the registrations on 15th of November, and the second World Teen Parliament gets into session on 22nd of January, 2023. So thank you so much, everyone, once again for joining us, all the people on Zoom and all the people on YouTube Live. If you have any questions, anything that you want to comment, or any ideas that you want to share during the conversation, feel free to put it in the comments in YouTube and in the chat on Zoom. Thank you once again for joining us. Let's initiate the 10th Parliamentary session of the World Teen Parliament. Let me invite the first speaker for today to initiate this parliamentary session. A very warm welcome to Padma Shri Dr. Niru Kumar, who's a national icon and board member for from the National Advisory Committee for the Election Commission of India, and is the founder and CEO for Ask Insights. Padma Shri, Niru ma'am, over to you for initiating the session. A very warm welcome.
Thank you, Daksh, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here. I was very excited about this session because we are speaking directly to the architects of tomorrow, the architects of humanity, I should say. So, I'm a diversity and inclusion consultant, and we have been talking so much about unconscious bias. Today, I want to ask all of you, why are we talking only of unconscious bias and not unconscious inclusion? The world has been polarized for long. Power, privilege, and polarization has been there for centuries and is likely to remain for a long time to come, even in the world you live in. The dominant group sets the norm, and it becomes as if it's the right thing to do. Whether you take the position of gender or race or LGBTQ, the dominant group sets the norm, and that is considered right or wrong. And even people of the non-dominant group start internalizing and start believing that that's the correct way. So therefore, the conscious and the unconscious gets divided. So let's say in our early childhood, in our homes, we have heard certain views and opinions about people of the non-dominant groups. And it's human. Everyone has biases. We will have biases for the rest of our lives. Even me, who's soaked in this work, even I have biases, right? So we have heard, all of us have heard in our homes, conversations about groups which are not completely inclusive. And we as young minds, as young children, we start imbibing that and believing that. And that forms our opinions for a long time to come. In short, it goes deep into the unconscious mind. I'm a person with disability. I had a different life experience. I got a disability in my early childhood. I got polio. So there was a struggle. Growing up in a country like India, being a female, it was a struggle. Being in hospitals, being in long lines, I felt that the savior at that time was a doctor. So I wanted to become a doctor. I became a doctor. I also felt that a lot of the world was unfair. So I took it upon myself to create fairness for others. Whenever I would see something happening to anybody which was unfair, I would question it. I would stand on the road and say, this is not fair. I would fight for them from a very, very early age. I would ask my mother why the domestic help in the house sleeps on the ground and I sleep on the bed. So the question of unfairness was so strong in me, and I became a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant. But whenever any group is different, three things can happen. In fact, I was giving a talk in Middlesex University, Dubai, and one of the students asked me, ma'am, you are what you are because of your story. You've got a Padma Shri award because of your difficulties, your challenges. And I said to him, whenever any group is different, three things can happen. Either they can be completely lost or they can turn negative. Only 1/3 will be on an overdrive like I am. And that's a handful. But those 2/3 aspiring people are lost. And that's because they did not start challenging the status quo. So who does it for them? The environment, the leaders, the change agents, the allies. Now, my question to all of you is, how do we get inclusion in the unconscious? Time has come. We're also aware that there are unconscious biases. We are aware that only 12% of the mind is conscious, 88% is unconscious. We are aware that biases exist. We are conscious. We try to restrain them. But sometimes in critical moments, we come right back to our childhood conditioning. No matter how much we have been trained, no matter how much we have learned. My experience in corporates is, I coach top leaders on this theme, and I see they have very good intent. They're with me in a training program and they say, Dr. Niru, we understand, coach us more, tell us more. And I tell them more. And they try because they've got good intent. But then you know what happens? There is fatigue. Oh, we've heard so much on the topic. Now what? We know this. We know what psychological safety. We know what is privilege. We know all of that. And then what happens? We come right back to our unconscious patterns, because all that knowledge was there only in that 12%. Now, to give you a hint, I use a lot of NLP, hypnotherapy. I've been trained in all of that. Stories, so that one training program that I do stays in the minds of my audience. Evidence here is Guneet, who just told me sometimes back that he had been to one of my training program and it was very inspiring. So it's my agenda that what I'm speaking or saying, I've got this one opportunity with this audience and I need to drive it into the unconscious mind and not let it stay in the conscious mind alone. How do we now come from knowledge to knowing to knowingness? Because that's the place where we will be inclusive to a lot more people than we are, where we will be able to provide psychological safety to a lot more people, where polarizations will decrease. It will never completely end. Where we can provide equity to a lot more many people and make sure that we are not resisting or defending our privilege. So just to give you a quick idea on that, two words I just used, equity and privilege. Now, equity, you might have heard of equity in terms of finance. You may not have heard of it in the theme of inclusion. The difference between equity and equality. Equality means providing a level playing field to all. Equity means taking care of specific needs of different individuals. It also means taking care of the backlog of the past. So whether it is race or it is gender, and I'll give you two examples to really help you understand the theme better. I was coaching a Black woman, and she told me that her mother had been raped and killed. And at that time, she was in her shop. I said, she was in her shop. Didn't she shout and scream? And she says she did. And the neighbors said, oh, these black people, they just keep making a lot of noise. And nobody came to help her. The stereotyping cost her her life. Just 2 days back, I heard a story of an Indian family where they had a fourth baby girl, and the husband hit the wife's head with a steel rod and her skull cracked open into two, and she died, leaving 4 orphan girls. And I was in presence of a divine lady who runs an orphanage called a Unique Home in Punjab in India. This lady, she looks after girl children. And I asked her, why only girl children? She says, nobody abandons a boy child in India. We find these girl children in garbage cans. And when she heard of this incident where the mother had died, leaving 4 orphan children because the father had beat her to death, she says, I couldn't sit still till I got those 4 babies with me. And that divine woman got those 4 babies to her and is now giving them immense love. Now, this is a backlog of the past. Equity means taking care of specific needs and making up for the backlog of the past. The other word I spoke about is privilege. I want you as the leaders of tomorrow to understand privilege in the right spirit. Because when I talk to leaders, I see 2 different responses. They get defensive sometimes. So privilege is nothing to feel guilty or ashamed about. If we are traveling in a nice, comfortable, air-conditioned car and we see some poor people outside, we don't have to get out of our car. We just feel very grateful for our privilege and feel responsible for those who are less privileged and take it upon us to do something about it. That's a healthy response to privilege. I see few leaders who are very humble about it and take it in that spirit. And I see others who say, well, if I'm born privileged, I didn't do it. It just happened. That's my luck. And why should I do anything about it? Why should I give up my place? Or are you threatening my place? And they get very defensive about it when there is no need, really. When we talk about gender targets in organizations, I get people saying, are you taking away the positions of men? And they resist the concept of both privilege and equity. This will change only when inclusion gets into the unconscious. When we move from knowledge to knowing to knowingness. And that's my question to you. How will you ensure that inclusion in the times to come is so deep that people of privilege are not the only ones to set the norms, that there is equity for everybody? And if there has been a backlog of hundreds of years, we take a collective responsibility for that. I see Daksh has come onto the screen, and that's my cue to stop talking. So I hope this has been meaningful for everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Niru, ma'am. And I am very sure that all our teen MPs will take a lot of this in their unconscious minds as well. I think a lot of it seeps down, and I think they do understand what they have been doing within the World Teen Parliament, that in democracy, majority rules, but you must govern with a little bit of sociocracy as well, of being a little more empathetic. So what we have told them that when you work in your internal teams, all our teen MPs work in sociocracy, that whatever single individual, any dissent, if it's there, give that the right kind of space, because that's where you actually become inclusive. Don't force things, and try to make more empathetic spaces within the complete ecosystem. Thank you so much, Niru, ma'am. We'll come back to you with the questions. Let us invite the next speaker for today to again add a different kind of a flavor to this conversation. Somebody who comes from an organization that has made a massive behavioral change in people across the world. And now we cannot imagine our lives without that very organization. He comes from that end of that organization, which typically I think, very, extensively works with people's behavior. And I think he has some amazing lessons for all our teen MPs. A very warm welcome to Mr. Guneet Singh, who's the head of marketing and creative solutions for Google Asia Pacific. So Guneet ji, over to you for your address to the World Teen Parliament in the 10th Parliamentary session, and a very warm welcome to you.
Thank you, Daksh, and welcome everyone. It's so good to see the number count going up as the session was starting. It shows all of you are joining and you're engaged. I know it's like fairly late in the evening in India right now, but it's really good to see how the engagement level is just going up. Literally, as Niru was talking through, every second there was a blip on the screen which showed someone new was joining. And it just made me feel so happy to be able to have joined at this hour. It's very tough to follow Niru. She is just so inspiring. I've had a chance to experience her in real, not behind a screen. And it's absolutely enthralling. You can have a room full of 300 people in pin drop silence, just latching onto every word that she's saying. So it's very, very tough to follow up with what she's doing. It was very, very, very inspiring for me to hear about the entire journey she wants each one of you to try and bring about, from knowledge to knowingness. It's a great phrase. I'm going to try and reuse it, Niru, with your patent copyright on it. But I don't want to come to you and ask you to do something specific today. I want to tell you why I'm here today. Daksh and I talked quite a few months ago about why we should be doing this and if I could help. And it's almost 11 o'clock for me right now at Singapore on Saturday, but there's a reason I'm here today. And that reason is the power that all of you bring. Now, it's not suddenly the fact that teenagers is a word that we love. It's not that teenagers are the largest percentage of the population of humanity that exists. Teenagers are around 16% odd. But you know what's really special about teenage, which can never happen again, is this cognitive change that occurs when you become teenagers. And this is recognized by psychologists, where during the age that you get into this, your brain starts developing in a manner where it can start thinking a lot more abstract. But along with that abstract thinking comes critical thinking. Now that's a beautiful fusion, which doesn't happen otherwise. When you're young, there's a lot of abstract thinking that can still happen. So don't get me wrong, children in the age of 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 can be amazingly abstract. They can do wonderful things, but what they lack is critical thinking, which is what really starts coming in when you enter this beautiful age, which is called teenage. Now, when that abstract thinking and criticality come together, it's a unique power that gets unleashed, which doesn't exist with most of us who are graying. Right? We've lost that thought, that ability to think as abstract. We can be a lot more critical. As Niru mentioned, it becomes very easy for us to sort of get judgmental. And therefore, we have to get speakers like her to come back and tell us to be not judgmental and make sure that we don't go there. But we lose that abstract thinking, which is a huge power that all of you have. And when that abstract thinking and criticality come together, there's this interesting piece of idealism which you have, and a willingness to challenge the old way of doing things. I think I'm echoing what Niru mentioned here. But that coming together of abstract thinking, criticality, and this complete belief that you can change the old way of doing things is what makes teenagers so powerful. And that's why I'm here today, because I believe each person in this room has the power to go make a change. So I'm not going to ask you to make any one change, but what I'm going to ask you today is to say, what is the change you're going to make? Because you have the privilege of being in this age group. You have the privilege of a mind which is ahead of the age groups before you and after you. How are you going to use that mind? If you go to the next slide, I just threw a couple of examples which are not going to be unfamiliar to you, right? You know the little girl on the left, she bunked school and went and stood outside the parliament, right? That's all she did. Or was it? Was it something more? Seemed like a really small thing, right? And it seems really cool. In school, you don't want to bunk classes. So great, bunk classes, hold a sign, nothing better than that. But hey, she didn't do that outside her school gate. She didn't do that outside her colony. She made it big enough to go in front of a parliament and then stay there. come rain, come snow, she was there, and that was her grit. And then you look at the girl on the right side. She's young and she's not using grit, but she's using her domain strengths in trying to be able to build something up. She's looking at seeing how she can help contamination in water. She's seeing how basic things that each one of you, I'm sure, identify with, which is like bullying. She's trying to see how she can use the little bit of knowledge that she has in tech to be able to try and find solutions there. Now, I'm not saying ideas don't happen in all of your minds. You're at an age where I'm sure every day in the morning you get an idea. And by the time it's the evening, you've had 3 more ideas. But how do you channelize those ideas and know which idea is really large enough is what you want to use your critical thinking for. So your abstract thinking is running ahead, giving you a sense of ideas, a bunch of ideas. You might want to do something about environment. You want to do something about belonging. There's so many things that you might want to do. But how big is your idea? Because you're at an age right now where you can risk and make that really, really large. And I love Einstein's quote here. And I truly believe it. If your idea is not absurd, there's no hope for it. Right? So don't go and say, I'm going to plant a tree. Please plant a tree. I'm not going to say don't plant a tree. I'm a big fan of people planting trees. But don't just plant one tree. That's not absurd. That's very doable. You're in an age group where you can do the absurd. And so my real ask for you, I'm not going to say anything else. I believe I'm here today because I'm talking to a set of people who can make a change if they decide to make a change. And so my humble request from you is really what I have on the last slide, which is if you don't stand for something, you will fall for anything. So please make sure you stand for something and don't let these teenage years go by without standing for something. So that's what I have to say today. And I'm really excited to hear what all of you have to say, because I'm sure there's many thoughts, there's many questions, and there's many ideas that Daksh has told me that seem to be brimming around. And I really want to sort of soak up all of that abstract energy and criticality for my own selfish reasons today, and stay awake till midnight as I'm hoping to. So please go ahead and make sure that Niru and I are enthralled with your energy.
Thank you so much, Guneet Sir, for being awake at this hour and sharing your time and expertise and experience with all our teen MPs. So now it's time for questions. I'll try to invite teenagers and they'll ask their questions. Charlize, please unmute yourself. You can ask your question.
Good evening. Am I audible? Good evening. I am Charlize from Freedom Public School, Anantnag, Kashmir, and I am greatly honored to be able to ask a question to Dr. Niru Kumar. And my question for you is, how well is India performing on ground or individual level when it comes to diversity and inclusion? Thank you.
Very interesting question, Charlize. When I started this work 15 years back, I can humbly say that I was perhaps the first person to start a formal conversation, especially within the corporate sector, on diversity and inclusion. And at that time, we were talking only about gender. People believed that diversity meant only gender. They would even say misplaced things like, we have a diversity candidate on our team. And however hard I might try to influence at that time that is much bigger, people would not really go into it. Today, I'm happy to say that in certain sectors, not all, in certain sectors, the conversation has increased to larger dimensions of diversity, which is ethnicity, which is ability, which is LGBTQ+I, which is also neurodiversity, which is also introvert, extrovert, age, and so many other things. People are beginning to talk about that. Having said that, in the corporate world, it is taking on great momentum. We recently did a whole conference where I felt that the conversation is not matching outside in society and inside the corporate world. We now need a collaboration. So I called that conference DICE, which is diversity, inclusion, collaboration and equity instead of DEI, which is the commonly used word. Unless government bodies, non-profits, educational institutes, and corporates, unless they come together as a force and collaborate and form alliances, till then, India is not going to progress. By 2050, by 2050, India is going to be the largest population in the world. If we don't leverage our diverse forces, if we don't leverage our women power, it's going to be a make or break deal, whether we are going to rise up or fall down. It's not only a noble thing to do. Let me talk only about women for a minute. It's not only a noble thing to do. It makes complete economic sense. The GDP of the country will increase by 16% by 2025 if we have more women participation. But the sad part is, now I'm going to tell you the disheartening part, because you as teens must know that. There is a World Economic Forum which benchmarks the global gender gap, which is measured on 4 parameters: the economic status, the political status, the health status, and the educational status of women. And it measures it in comparison to men. Scandinavian countries like Norway are right there on top. Yemen is way below, is probably the last one. India is very near the bottom. In 2017, India fell down, not up, 27 notches. So if we are under the misconception that the position of women in India is getting better, we have to think again. 6 months back, it was there all on our front daily newspapers that we have gone down another 12 notches. We're not getting better. Conversations are increasing, but clearly there is something still lacking. Clearly, a lot more work has to be done. So I would say, as far as conversation, yes, we are better. As far as the actual results, not yet. We're waiting for you.
Guneet sir, if you want to add something, please feel free. So
no, I sort of echo what Dr. Kumar said. There is a lot to be done. I also, however, feel that it's important that we go away from the labels that exist for inclusion, because sometimes those labels start becoming more than what they are, and there's people also start exploiting the labels. I think at the core of it, if we lead with empathy and we lead with a sense of making sure that it's our role to make someone else who's in front of us or around us feel belonged, we will not need labels. We will not need people to come and tell us that this is a label that you need to involve and integrate. So if we just have a lot more empathy and belongingness, and I can tell you that happens a lot more easily at the younger age groups than it happens later on. I do think as young age groups absorb what's happening around them, they start losing a bit of this empathy and sense of belongingness. And they start labeling people, and then labels start creating divides. So I would sort of lead and say, for each person in this room, if you can make sure that you and somebody around you is a little bit more empathetic, and make sure that they're focused on belonging, all the other assimilations will start happening. But yes, we have a huge journey to go.
I loved what you said about the abstract and the critical thinking. That was fabulous.
The next question comes from Shivansh. Shivansh, please, over to you. Shivansh, you'll have to unmute yourself.
Sir, am I audible?
Yes.
I'm really sorry, sir. My question is for Guneet, sir. Hi, I'm Shivansh Kumar Raj. I'm a member of Parliament in the World Teen Parliament. And my question is to Mr. Guneet, sir. Sir, in today's world, marketing and social media management have become an essential part of any corporate structure. Having this in sight, how can startups with low investment expand their consumer base through advertising and compete with large corporate houses? Also, recently, The issue of moonlighting has been an issue being discussed widely in the corporate world. What are your thoughts on this, and how do you think this can be countered? Thank you.
Shivansh, you completely sort of embody the generation that's today. You're out walking, you're on the phone, you're possibly doing a few other things other than attending the team conference, and you're able to do it all really, really well. So congratulations first for being this amazing multitasker who's being able to do everything. And you're also typing on the side. So, I mean, it's the amount of faculties that you're using at one time and the comfort you have of doing it while walking on a phone is just absolutely incredible. I'm so happy to see it. Okay, so let me try and get to your questions first. So your first question was, how can startups compete? I'm not really worried about the medium in which a company tries to communicate its value, whether it's social media, whether it's traditional media through television, print, out of home, or social media, which could be the traditional posts of the world or the new fangled videos of the space that exist. What's important for anybody and everybody is to know, are they really creating value for the consumer? And if you know the value that you're creating and you're able to create the message correctly, then you can choose whatever media resonates most with that consumer audience of yours. So the only thing I would tell startups is to go back. Don't worry about trying to ape those big companies. They already have a lot that's happened in their value communication. As a startup, you obviously have this beautiful, great idea, which says, hey, there is a problem somewhere, there's a gap, and I'm going to fill that gap and create value. Lead with that thought and make sure that anybody and everybody who wants to get your message gets that. Don't get lost in, I need a celebrity, I need an influencer, I need 60,000 likes. Those are all the fluff. Focus on landing the message of your value clearly, and the medium is just a way of doing it. So that's what I would sort of say on social media, startups versus big companies, and so on. And I don't know if I've answered your question, but if I haven't, feel free to ask again as you're taking your evening walk in the beautiful green background. Your next one was on moonlighting. I think there is, again, I don't know if there is a simple answer to that. As most organizations are coming to norm with this new form of working, which is hybrid. I think COVID unsettled humanity in a manner which nobody had predicted. And there have been reams which have been written about organization behavior, team motivation, employee effectiveness, resource utilization, etc. There's like volumes and volumes of paperwork around that. But COVID came and unsettled all of those assumptions, because what it did was make the entire world an experiment which nobody had imagined. And out of that experiment, there are still things coming out which people haven't been able to figure out. Do I go and work at my office? Do I work at home? Am I better at office or am I better at home? Am I more productive there? Am I less productive at home? Am I more productive at work? These are questions which we don't have answers to today because we haven't experienced them. You can't take out and measure employee productivity in 3 months. So this will have to play out. And large organizations which have the ability to measure it, small organizations which have the ability to feel it instantly because they're going to see the impact absolutely immediately, will start coming down to certain norms, which will then become rituals along the way for work behavior. Moonlighting is just one of those things. So I don't think there's a clear answer on what should be done, what should not be done. But you are engaged in a commercial relationship with an organization that you are working with. You have to honor that commercial relationship. And besides that, you should figure out what you're allowed to do and not allowed to do. Many organizations encourage you to go ahead and create value, which is innovative, etc. Some organizations might not be able to. And if you don't find that value fit, my question would not be go break the policy, but possibly go find and work with an organization where your values and the organization's values come together.
Thank you so much, sir. Can I ask you just a small follow-up question?
Sure. I miss seeing you on your beautiful background, but yes, go ahead.
Sir, my question is, like, in India, basically, in my experience, those who are moonlighting are perhaps, belong to the poorer section of the society. and they do multiple jobs at the same time so that they can have some kind of some amount of money for their family, for the family to feed, so that they can feed their family. So ma'am, at the end, I understand that there's a corporate angle to it, but how do we need to ignore the ethical angle and the social angle to it to bolster the corporate angle that is there?
Shivansh, I'm going to step back over there. I'm not sure if people choose to do something outside of their core work at the office because of only economic reasons. Most often it's fueled by some other passion. Things that I was talking to you about in the beginning, right? When you talk about your ideas, when you believe in an idea, and people who are beyond teenagers do get ideas. I didn't mean to say that all ideation in humanity stops as soon as people cross over from teenagers to like 20 years old. So people beyond that age also get ideas. They also have passion and they want to fulfill those ideas. And sometimes they might not find the avenue to do that at work. So there could be many reasons why someone chooses to step out of what they're doing. And I also think, like I said, like I told you earlier, I think there is a new understanding and paradigm of how work is happening. The entire gig economy that exists allows that flexibility for people who want to be able to do more and not get bound down by a certain amount of hours to a certain organization. So there are different working and employment and earning models that are getting created in the world. You wouldn't have heard of the gig economy at the scale it was operating 10 years ago or 15 years ago versus where it's today. And I know many people who are very successfully running their entire houses on a gig economy mode. So there are going to be different models that will come up. And I think we just need to give it time for both organizations and employees to find the right mix of operation, to make sure that there are the right options that exist for each one of them to choose what they want to do. Everybody might not want to get into a gig economy mode. Some people might want to, and people should have the options to do so. And hopefully in the long run, we'll see both of those evolve. It might not happen in the next 3 months, but you have to understand most big organizations don't run on coal, electricity, iron ore, they run on people. So if talent decides to move a certain way, organizations will find ways of accommodating and harnessing that talent.
Thank you so much, sir.
The next question comes from Janvi. Janvi, over to you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Guneet Singh. I'm currently working as a member of the parliament at the World Teen Parliament. I belong to Lucknow, Uttar Pradesh, and I'm in class 12, State MR Jaipuria School, Bansal campus. My question is to Dr. Niru Kumar, ma'am. Ma'am, as you have worked closely with the Election Commission of India, you must be aware about the problem of Sarpanch Pati commonly arising in the Gram Panchayats of our country, and where the actual decisive power and the political power is wielded by the husbands of the elected women representatives. That has been a major problem in India. So what has been the Election Commission's approach to solve this problem, and how can we, the teenagers, work to avoid this problem in the future and tackle it? Thank you.
Thank you, Janvi. What a wonderful question. And you're absolutely right. See, we see a lot of divide in the awareness levels in the metro cities, in small towns, and in villages. The patriarchal system still continues to a large extent in the smaller towns and villages. Government bodies yet have to do a lot in this area. In the Election Commission, we've had 3 election commissioners who are passionate in the field of diversity and inclusion. Currently, there is a lot of focus on people with disabilities and with inclusion of transgenders. So even they have the restraint of working on areas in milestones. So from the time that I have been involved with the commission, they have done a commendable job in making polling booths accessible. The postal ballot system was started for the first time, where people with disabilities are able to vote from home. And there is a plan in the pipeline that if there are certain communities where the women are not allowed to come out, then the postal ballot system we provided to them as well. Now, today, gender is not binary. Even transgenders are included into the larger scheme, of a sense of belonging and participation in the democracy. So the incentives which bring them in. The point is, the more the number of people from the voters, the participation from every sector as voters will eventually lead to people of diverse groups coming into power, being the policymakers. I think the Election Commission per se cannot do as much as the leaders can. The Election Commission can enable processes where everybody votes, people of diverse groups vote, and they have the ease to be able to vote, which will automatically lead to representatives in the government sector of the diverse groups. And then the change will take place. It will take a little bit of time, but I think the process that is going on is going to reach there.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
The next question comes from Chinmay.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Chinmay Joshi. I'm of class 11 from Mansukh Kothari National School from Pune, Maharashtra. My question is for Mr. Guneet, sir. What is Google's future plan for the digital initiative for India? So Google has a big influence on India and on this planet, and we are rapidly going towards digitalization. So what is the future plan for Google? How will it help us in digitalizing? And what will be the future scenario about digitalizing? Also, how can this help for specially abled teenagers?
Thanks, Chinmay, for asking that question. I'm not here to speak for Google. I'm here to speak for all of you and to possibly share what I've learned, not just across Google, but a bunch of other organizations I've had the privilege of being with. So I'm not going to necessarily get into what Google needs to do or if Google is doing, because if you do a Google search, you'll see everything that Google is doing. But what I do want to talk about is the space where India is at right now, right? I think we've gone over the first curve of connectivity and smart devices being in people's hand. So we've had that first big wave that's happened thanks to many of the telecom sort of providers to have created that connectivity infrastructure and for handset prices to have come down. We now have a smart computing device with access to internet in a lot more hands than they were earlier. Now we still have some way to go considering our population. The story is not over. We still have a lot more to do. And as the penetration goes down, whether we like it or we don't, the reality is it's connected to economics and affordability. And so and there are many other things which are connected to economics and affordability. Literacy, awareness, familiarity, the ability to sort of troubleshoot when you get into situations. All of these are all linked, unfortunately, to economics, right? And as the internet goes deeper, you will see a new set of consumers keep coming online. And the internet needs to adapt to these consumers who might have very different experiences, very different literacy backgrounds, very different awareness backgrounds, very different troubleshooting and support available. And that's exactly what not just one organization, but every organization in the space which is empowering and creating this digital economy has to do. Whether it's organizations like Google, Meta, Amazon's, whether it's telecom organizations like Jio, Airtel, whether it's handset organizations like Samsung or the others. There are many others also beyond these big names who are actually taking the effort of filling in the gaps because they're very much closer to these need states that exist than many of the larger organizations. Most large organizations take decisions if it will help hundreds of millions of users. But you might have 20 million users who need something, or for example, you're saying disability. That might be a small percentage. It might not touch hundreds of millions of users. But somebody needs to be able to stand up and create a solution for them. And so there are many small organizations which are doing it. As they do it, large organizations are able to put their heft behind it to make sure it reaches the right finesse and scale to go forward. But what if as a person who's lived the technology space for over 20 years in India, I think what we really need is technology which can straddle all the economic strata that is now coming on board, and which needs to go beyond inputs which require things like typing, which require things like finger dexterity, because you have to understand different age populations are also coming in, and they don't necessarily have finger dexterity to go on a small screen and going tick, tick, tick all over the place, right? So these are all things that, so the biggest piece would be for us to make this entire access as seamless and as voice-led as possible. Now, I know that might still be excluding to a certain set of users who might not be able to use voice. But if we're able to bring it to that point, then that'll be the last leap for us to take. So that's the big piece somebody needs to do, which is to look at how the input control happens. And that if that can become completely voice oriented, it will take things in a very different way.
Thank you, sir.
The next question comes from Mehnaz.
Yes, hello everyone. My question is for Dr. Niru Kumar. It's such an honor to be speaking to you, ma'am. I'm Mehnaz Feroz from Omega International School, Chennai, Tamil Nadu. So my question is, are the biases and prejudices in the kids of this generation still influenced by their parents' beliefs? Or is there a larger influence by social media and other media platforms? Because nowadays kids do have a wider access to these platforms at a very early age. So does this have a larger influence on their mindset than maybe the beliefs of their parents?
Definitely, Menas. So Gen Z, as we call them, are much more inclusive because you all are global kids. See, what shapes a generation is what was technology like when you were born. Two things shape a generation. What was technology like when you were born, and historical things like the COVID or world wars or whatever. You people were born with iPads. You started before you could read. You could do the scroll down menu and click on something, that a cartoon that you wanted to see. So definitely, you are global kids. Your exposure is much more. And therefore, your acceptance of people is much wider. Having said that, and you fight with your parents. Whenever your parents say something which is discriminatory on colorism, see, colorism exists in India as well. It's not only in the Western region. If your parents talk about color, or if they talk about body shaming, somebody's fat, somebody's thin, and parents tend to do that. Or if they have homophobia and they talk about gays and all of the entire spectrum in a very different way, what do? You fight with them. And that is wonderful. That is fantastic. We as parents, we are always told by our kids, Mom, that was inappropriate. Even to a diversity and inclusion consultant, I hear that all the time. So yes, you are much more aware. Having said that, you remember when I first spoke, I was talking about the unconscious mind. There are some beliefs that get into the unconscious mind without even you realizing it. So one generation, 2 generations are not enough to totally eliminate those biases. It will take a few generations for that to happen. What you have heard in your childhood, even without, you might be playing with your toys and somebody in the background is talking, it still goes into your unconscious mind. So I was coaching somebody who said, a white person who said, my kid doesn't discriminate Black children at all. He's so comfortable. He has his best friends are Black people. I said, what about the parents? In their time, was that much inclusion there? He said, well, no. I said, well, then that is not going in one generation. So it will take time. But having said that, Manas, what will make a difference is awareness. What we are doing right now. When we are talking about it, more and more conversations, not only conversations, reading about it, listening to podcasts, reading books on these subjects, on these trends. That is what will make your current trend become permanent and overcome the biases and even the conditioning of the past. Does that help?
Yes, thank you so much, ma'am.
Yes.
Pranshu Malhotra. Pranshu, over to you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Pranshu Malhotra from Delhi Public School, Bangalore East, and my question is for Guneet sir. First of all, thank you for making it despite the timing. My question is, what skills do you think will be important for freshers looking to enter the volatile space of tech entrepreneurship or the creative side of integrating technology into consumer solutions now versus in 5 years?
First of all, thanks. And don't worry, I think teen spirit is like caffeine, so it works very easily. So all kudos to you guys. But I think, yeah, coming back, to your question, 5 years, I don't know if it's 5 years, 7 years, I won't sort of get dimensionalized about the number of years over here. But overall, what I'm seeing is that a lot of things that we used to put a huge value on, things like writing code, is getting democratized and being taken over by machines. And a lot of you, if you've actually playing in that space, would have actually experienced it. There used to be a time when somebody used to write the code to make sure every screen on a website or an app would get rendered. So you'd put like space, blocks, pixel, colors, all the details. And now you just drag drop 15 things and that page gets rendered. So there's obviously something happening at the back end, which is creating that code. So a bunch of that is going to which we value today and which has been valued in the past, which is what a lot of our IT infrastructure in India has grown upon, which is high quality, high excellence coding, might not necessarily be that relevant. What, however, machines can't do really well is creativity, right? And finding value. And I really somehow believe it's not something that people have realized right now is empathy. Machines can't be empathetic. Machines can read patterns and trends and infer from that, but machines can't be empathetic. Humans can be. When you empathize, you realize gaps. When you realize gaps, you identify areas of creating value. When you identify areas of creating value, you can be creative about joining 3 different resources to create that value. And that's the skill that really is going to be in demand, more than writing the most amazing C++ code page. So creativity and empathy will be the 2 biggest pieces. And then there'll be a lot of adjunct pieces around problem solving and so on. But creativity and empathy, which are the core to humanity, frankly speaking. If you step back and say, how are humans different? That's how we are different. And so the real need of what makes human different will become more pronounced. So those are the skills you should all work towards. So, we were having a conversation in the last piece, in the last question when Mena was talking about parents and kids fighting. And I have 2 kids who are just about to turn teens, and believe me, they're already fighting. They do always also check. I do think that, when I talk to their educators, I keep asking them to teach them to keep learning. And I keep referring back to, I think, an exercise I did in class 3, which I found extremely amazing. I don't know if the educators realized how incredible that was. But in class 3, the kids were asked to make a maze, not solve a maze. It's a dimensionally different. It seems like a very small exercise. Also, I go make a maze. But instead of solving a maze, which everybody's been told to do, when you ask to make a maze, your mind opens up to completely different things. How will someone navigate that maze? How do I confuse that person? How do I make sure that person goes on a trail, gets blocked, right? Look at how your mind is going to work versus, okay, fine, I need to get my line through a bunch of squiggles and reach an endpoint. It completely changes the dimension of your thinking. And that's the sort of learning that we need to have. And that's the sort of skills we need to have as we go into the next generation. I hope that answers your question.
That did.
I'm
Thank
making
you.
a maze instead of solving a maze, and you'll understand what I was saying.
Thank you.
Ursula Jan.
Greetings, everyone. So my question is to Padma, Shri, Dr. Niru, Kumar. Greetings, ma'am. So my question is that recently the World Economic Forum has ranked India at 135 out of 146 countries in its global gender gap index for the year 2022, right? So what are the main factors that are triggering this huge gender gap in our Indian society, and how can we at individual levels work for suppressing the factors responsible for the huge generation gaps in our Indian society?
Great questions. All questions that are coming are one better than the other. And, as the conversations have been going on, I was thinking of one thing. Is it a coincidence that all the girls are asking me questions and all the boys are asking Guneet questions? Is it a coincidence or is there a trend there? The concern that the girls are asking about, is it going to be a better world for women? Why is it that the whole Sarpanch issue, or why is it that we are falling down in the World Economic Forum, shows that even in this generation, in a country like India, girls of your age also, you have seen your mothers, you have seen the safety restrictions that are put on you. You have seen other issues where biases do exist, where expectations of people are different for girls and different for boys. And that is why you're concerned. And that is why this, I'm guessing, that's the reason for this trend that the girls are asking this question and the boys are asking other questions, right? This is the reason. The biases are still prevalent. Like I said in one of the questions, the force of collaboration has not yet happened. We have not yet started talking to this in schools as a part of a mandatory curriculum. I was recently invited to Labasna, which is the Civil Services Institute of India, where every civil services student goes there, right? And I gave a keynote, and after that I asked the director, why is this not there in their curriculum? Why is diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging not there in their curriculum? And he said, oh, very timely. Why don't you stay back? We have a meeting on Monday. Well, that actually led to us adding that to their curriculum. And I personally did a very big train the trainer for their faculty. But look at it, it was not there. There has been a lot of backlog of the role of women in India. India is the only country where son bias still exists. India and Bangladesh are the only countries where son bias exists to this extent. I was asked a question by some Westerner who says, why is it that Indians don't know the sex of their unborn child? Is it because you don't have ultrasounds? So what do I tell them? What do I tell them? That it is legally banned because girls are aborted and not even allowed to be born. When such a huge social backlog exists, it's not surprising. And even more disheartening is that COVID times took us completely back. The rate of domestic violence of women increased. Working women were given the household chores back again. Their work was not considered important. Their work from home was not considered important. The health of women was not considered as important as the health of men. The nutrition of women was not considered as important as men. Those gaps still have to be covered. We have to look into each and every of these aspects, the 4 parameters the World Economic Forum says: educational, health, political, and financial. All of these have to be looked into before we can rise up in the World Economic Forum.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much.
So there's still a very big list of questions that's coming, but the time is already over. It's already 9 p.m. in India. So it's time to conclude this session. But before we conclude this session, these 100 teenagers that you right now see on your screens, all these people together got more than 235,000 votes when they came into power last year, when they finally became the teen MPs of the World Teen Parliament. And we are hopeful that this year, even more teenagers, which we already have started receiving entries. So one thing that we wanted to, typically understand before this session comes to an end, because we are talking to two people who understand this very aspect of human life very well. One who understands human behavior very well, and the other one who understands inclusivity very well. A small little question that actually was asked by somebody around 2000 years back, but nobody responded. And that question actually came from Socrates. When Cleisthenes defined democracy around 2500 years back, he said it should only be an intellectual democracy. It should not be democracy by birthright. But all of us right now live in democracies by birthright, where people get to vote just by the virtue of their birth. And Socrates never liked it. He said the biggest problem with this was that if the voter is not skilled in voting, you would live in a demagoguery. So do both our guests today think that is there a space that we could identify 2 or 3 values or universal values that must be there in every single voter? And can those be taught, or can there be some experimentation around it? Any closing thoughts on this, and the session comes to an end? If you want to contribute, you can. Otherwise, we can conclude the session right away.
It's a question people have been pondering for 2000 years. So I'm going to take some time and let Niru lead.
All right, I'll take a go at it. Okay, first of all, the way we describe intellectuality is very skewed. The way we describe IQ is very skewed. What we knew of IQ for all these years is not IQ at all, is not intelligence at all, is not intellectuality at all. There are many different aspects of IQ. We also did not know anything about brain plasticity. We did not know that the brain can increase its capability at any age. It can be trained. New pathways can be formed. It's called synaptogenesis, neurogenesis. The brain can be trained in many different ways. So when there is, let me talk about neurodiversity, when there are people from the autistic spectrum disorders, or there are people with learning disabilities, or those whom we call on the borderline of the IQ level, are they meant to live like this forever, or can it be trained and can it be changed? When there is a possibility for the brain to expand in several dimensions, I don't think humans are at all limited. When nature has made the brain to increase in all 360 dimensions, how can humans decide whether one person is intellectually more superior than the other to be able to vote? So I think the voting right is for everybody. And I think democracy means that each and every citizen feels a sense of belonging and participation.
Thank you so much for the response. I think Guneet, you want to add something?
Yeah, I was sort of trying to fast forward 2000 years in the back of my mind. But I sort of agree with, right? I think it's very tough to label what is intellectual and what is not intellectual. I would sort of say if I had an option of possibly rewriting what the 2000-year-old question, I would replace intellectuality with empathy. If we can measure empathy and we can make sure that those who are empathetic, they're allowed to vote, I think we might not be in a perfect condition, but we might be in a much better condition.
Thank you so much to both our guests for taking out the time for this session today. There's still a big, long list of questions that we'll be sharing with you on email, and you can, if you have the time, please do respond to them so that our teenagers get a little more of your life experience and they can learn from it. Thank you so much, everyone, for being a part of this session. This was the 10th Parliamentary session of the World Teen Parliament, and there are only 2 more sessions left for these current sitting MPs. So speed up whatever you're doing, all the ideas that you're working on. Try to do the maximum within the next 2 months that you have with you, and get ready to welcome the next 100 teen MPs at the 2nd World Teen Parliament on 22nd of January, 2023. Thank you so much, everyone. Have an amazing night's sleep ahead. Good night. Enjoy. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Namaste.
Thank you.